By the time you're watching this video, Adobe will have implemented price increases for many customers. And this is at a time when they've announced already high levels of profitability increasing year on year. They've been busy innovating, and not just their products, but also their business model and their pricing. So what does this all mean for us photographers, videographers and creators? Stick with me and we'll unpack the changes, the good, the not so good, and consider the potential longer term impact. So in a world of higher inflation, many companies are waking up to the need for annual price increases again. And Adobe are certainly not asleep at the wheel on this. I had a 4% increase in my Creative Cloud subscription back in January, and now a further increase of 6% in November. Now, price increases are not always a bad thing, so long as they're justified, and we need to consider other factors. The value for money versus alternatives, the value for money for us as users, the profitability of the provider, and the levels of innovation. Because innovation is not free, it takes resources, and people should be rewarded for good innovation. Picking up on the point about the financials, in Adobe's case, if we look at their 2023, their Q2 financials, we see some pretty positive figures. Revenue up 10% year on year, 13% currency adjusted. Operating income at about 34% based on GAAP figures. Net income at 27% based on GAAP figures, and higher if you take the non-GAAP figures. But very healthy and static in percentage terms, but growing based on growing revenue. Annualized recurring revenue, ARR, which is really important measure for subscription-based businesses, was also healthy. So Adobe's longer term strategies are certainly flowing through to healthy rewards. As is often the case, success comes from many individual decisions. And before we look at the future, let's quickly reflect on the 41 years to date with Adobe. Adobe was founded back in 1982 with the purpose of selling their first product, which was the PostScript page definition language. They had some early success and licensed it to Apple for use in their laser printers, and actually Steve Jobs liked it so much he tried to buy the company for $5 million. In the end, he took a 19% stake at 5 times his valuation, plus a 5-year license fee paid for up front, which made Adobe the first company in Silicon Valley to be profitable in year 1. Adobe Illustrator was their first application, launched in 1987 with Photoshop 2 years later in 1989, and Premiere launched 2 years later in 1991. These were obviously boxed products until the early 2000s, when increasingly they became digital downloads. In 2013, Adobe launched their Creative Cloud product, rolling all of their apps into a single subscription-based model, making them an early adopter and innovator in this space, which is very relevant now, as we'll see. So for 10 years, Adobe has been a software as a service company primarily, with annual major upgrades going away to a more phased approach with more continuous updates and upgrades. Equally, where Adobe has led, others have followed. During the 10 years, innovation has largely been focused on product functionality though. However, embedded in the latest pricing update, there is some renewed commercial and business model innovation with the arrival of generative credits. Until now, the processing done by Adobe's products has been local, provided by you, the users. However, with the rise of generative AI-driven functionality, that processing increasingly uses Adobe resources, which gives them a challenge as it costs them money. Their solution is generative credits. And as of the 1st of November, depending on your subscription, you will get a quota of generative credits per month. These reset each month, and if you haven't used them, then you lose them. Once you run out of them during a month, then with Creative Cloud, you can continue to use the generative AI functionality. However, processing may be slower. However, with other subscriptions, you will get a maximum of 2 actions per day, And with some of the free subscriptions, you will merely get the opportunity to upgrade to continue using that functionality. Each generative AI-driven action costs 1 generative credit as of today, and that's limited to an output of 2000 by 2000 pixels in things like Firefly. As of today, generative AI-driven functionality is relatively limited, but quite useful. However, as we'll see in a minute, Adobe has some significant plans to expand the range of functionality that is AI-enabled. So in effect, Adobe has split the model into a platform fee for access to their software and a usage fee for the use of specific AI-driven functionality. As of today, if you have a Creative Cloud subscription, then you should have enough credits, although the photography subscriptions, it may be a lot tighter for you. With changes to the business model and pricing, timing can be important, along with trying to show that there is no or little impact. Nothing to see here. And this is probably why we saw these changes announced at the same time as the Adobe MAX event, during which we were given teasers of the future, such as Project Fast Fill, which is generative fill for video, which looked really good. Project Scene Change, which allows you to merge two videos together, one with the background and one with the subject, and merge them together to create a single, almost interactive green screen. One of my favorites, Project Dub Dub Dub, which would take this video and translate me into any one of many different languages, but still sounding like me. Project Res Up, which is about upscaling videos and GIFs. And Project See Through, which is about removing window reflections and look really impressive too. The demos all look great, but how long will they be until they come into reality is a question that I had in my mind. So the future is generative AI driven, which is why the introduction of generative credits is so critical for Adobe. But it does raise some questions and things to watch out for, because Adobe have in effect now, with generative credits, created a non-financial currency where they control both sides of the equation. How many generative credits you get and for how much, and then how much each action costs in terms of generative credits. Combined, this gives them more levers to dynamically control their profitability. Today, actions all cost 1 generative credit, but what about video AI functionality? Will it cost more credits? And over time, will it be credits per minute? Equally, Adobe say that the cost is based on computational costs, but then they go on to say, and the value of a generative AI feature used. That use of the word value is interesting, as it means that Adobe is potentially looking to raise the price of functionality that they think has more value to you as a user, whilst their computational cost remains the same. The flip side is, let's take a scenario where you create a mask in Photoshop and you ask Photoshop to provide you some generative AI in the form of a large fir tree. You're charged 1 credit for the first iteration, but none of the 3 options are right. So you hit refresh, and I assume this costs you another generative credit because you're using another action. The same again, none of the 3 are quite right, and it takes 3 attempts, so you've been charged 3 generative credits. It could be argued that it was your poor prompt that caused the poor results, and therefore you should pay for the computational power used. However, equally, it could be the poor training of the AI. And actually, by saying that you wanted 3 more, you're in effect training the Adobe AI. These are the kinds of issues that may become more important if over time your generative credit allowance becomes tighter. Where is that balance of the responsibility of you, the user, and the responsibility of Adobe to provide a quality product based on AI? Business model innovation needs the same approach as product innovation, so I'm sure we'll see Adobe tweaking their model over the coming years. Subscription-based models are good for accessing a more continuous flow of innovation and improvements, and therefore it may be the right model for this next phase where we're going to see high levels of innovation driven by the leveraging of generative AI. However, you're often paying for innovation even if it's of no use for you with a subscription model. You can't just skip an annual release as you could do with boxed products. At the moment, the pipeline of generative AI-powered innovation from Adobe is looking really great, but it feels like we're going to have to keep an eye on how that pipeline is flowing through and how the business model is being innovated. Adobe will know that if they get that balance wrong, people may switch to alternative apps, or plugins may appear that eat their lunch from beneath, where a plugin is cheaper to buy or access than it is to buy more generative credits from Adobe. So they're going to have to really think this through and keep that balance in check. So it's certainly going to be interesting times from a functionality perspective. Let us know in the comments below, what are your thoughts? Which functionality are you really looking forward to? And as always, it'll be great to see you on a future video.